Shrinarayana namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudiraye. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So we are continuing our discussion of the third canto, and the previous session we summarized chapter 8, and today is going to be a fresh discussion on chapter 9. In one sense, it is a continuation of chapter 8, because chapter 8 of the third canto ended with Lord Sri Brahma determining that his origin was Lord Vishnu. So he tried searching for the Lord by descending into the stem, because he was manifested from the lotus stem that sprang from the navel of Sri Garbhodakashai Vishnu. And the lotus, as we learned in the previous session, is a manifestation of the fruitive desires of the living entities who are inert and who are to be reintroduced into creation when Lord Brahma begins creation. So the fruitive desires themselves have discolored, in one sense, have colored the Lord, Sri Garbhodakashai Vishnu, of a much more deeper blue. And that deeper blue signifies that their desires themselves are somewhat unqualified. As a consequence, the Lord basically is displaying the deeper blue, which is somewhat tamasic. And as the lotus is created, the lotus is a manifestation of the fruitive desires, which means that the fruitive desires of the living entities, as they are going to re-enter into the material sky, practically empowers Lord Brahma to create facility for such fruitive desires, because he is practically going to facilitate karma. As he is going to facilitate karma, he develops faculties, he develops intelligence, he develops what we would call a Shakti and knowledge based on what he ought to be doing, because there has to be some cognizance. It's like building a house. And if you're going to build a house, you need to know what the desires of those who are going to live in the house are. So in one sense, he is building a prison house, because these are the thoughts of prisoners. The jiva is a prisoner who is identified with the material sky. And those fruitive activities practically manifest a certain kind of body, a certain environment, very much suited for the jiva to go through the process of reformation so that he could be rehabilitated after undergoing a prison sentence and coming in touch with good behavior and understanding what is the proper spiritual culture, because the jiva is spiritual by nature, that's intrinsic. But then the rebellion of the jiva is being facilitated because the Lord is merciful. He says that you have free will and you're desiring this, and here's your, what we would call, sandbox. So Lord Brahma is creating a sandbox, and because he has to create a sandbox, he has to have a good understanding of what kind of a sandbox should be created for the jivas to be playing in. What kind of a sandbox should be facilitated for their karma to be manifest. So this is Lord Brahma's mandate. And that mandate is reflected in the potency of the lotus. And the creative powers that come are manifested from the navel of Sri Garbhodakashai Vishnu. And just as we read in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, that Lord Chaitanya, who is considered, he is golden in color, he is golden. He turns a very dark color, which is a very dark tamasic color, when he absorbs the sinful reactions of Jagai and Madai. So in a similar manner, before the manifestation of Lord Brahma, Lord Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, as he is lying in the causal ocean, and all the jivas are contained and they are practically in his slumber, divine slumber. In that particular circumstance, the manifestation of his color is also somewhat bluish. Now we need to understand that in one sense, there's only one reality. The other reality, which is the material reality, is temporary. So Lord Balaram is the first expansion from Lord Krishna, and Lord Balaram is non-different from Krishna, except for his color. He is completely non-different. And he has a very deep motivation of serving. This is Lord Balaram's motivation. He just wants to offer service, intense service. And the idea of not wanting to disturb Krishna's Leela is foremost in Balaram's mind, because it is his potency, the Sandhini potency, which has practically manifested the spiritual sky, because Sandhini is Sat, which is eternal. So Krishna's body, Krishna's paraphernalia, the pastimes, the concept of spiritual existence, which is eternal, is all a manifestation of Balaram's potency. It is Sandhini, the Sat potency. Now, Balaram does not want to disturb Krishna's pastimes. As a consequence, it is he who leaves Vraja. He leaves Vraja and he expands into the Vaikuntha lokas. His expansion into the Vaikuntha is as Mahasankarshana. This Mahasankarshana is a Vaikuntha personality, which means that he is not in Goloka, he is in Vaikuntha. And Sri Mahasankarshana expands into Karunodakashayi Vishnu, who lies on the causal ocean. Sri Karunodakashayi Vishnu is also known as Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu, Karunodakashayi Vishnu, is the first Purusha. He then expands into Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. And the idea of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu is to maintain creation, maintain the universe. So, as a universe manifests from Karunodakashayi Vishnu, Lord Garbhodakashayi Vishnu enters into the universe and his potency maintains the universe. So, in this chapter, we are talking about a conversation about Sri Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, who is manifested from Karunodakashayi Vishnu and is maintaining the universe. And he is the origin of the Guna avatars. He is the origin of Kshirodakashayi Vishnu. He is the origin of Lord Shiva. He is the origin of Lord Brahma. He is basically the origin of all the avatars who manifest in the world and at different, periodic times. But we want to understand this potency of Lord Balaram because it's a frightening thought. It's a very frightening thought that we are a part of a sandbox. Yeah, a sandbox is given to a child to play with. A sandbox is given to a child so that the child is preoccupied and does not cause damage to the surroundings. Yeah, if you don't engage the child's intelligence, the child then becomes destructive. So the jiva is given a sandbox. So it's very frightening to understand that all the wonderful activities that we engage in, which we are very proud of outside of Krishna consciousness, is nothing but us fooling around in a sandbox. And how many lifetimes have we fooled around in sandboxes? How many lifetimes of degrading experiences do we carry within our hearts? These are samskaras, because if you come in touch with the mode of ignorance, it leaves a blemish which is very difficult to remove. Yeah, it's like basically when you go out on a holy day, when I'm talking about holy as in the Hindi name or the Sanskrit name holy, not H-O-L-Y, it's H-O-L-I. As you walk out during the holy festival, it is a strange thing. They have a concoction, especially here in Vrindavan. You can find that every street corner, there's a bench, and then they have different colors. and there's a group of people who stand behind those benches. So invariably, as you pass by, you sit in a rickshaw, you walk by, they are going to throw water at you, which is very, very muddy to such an extent that it will never leave the dhoti. You cannot remove it from the dhoti. No matter how hard you try, the color doesn't come off. See, some of you should come here during Holi and you would know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you can't object to it. They don't misbehave. They do not misbehave. If you carry yourself with dignity and they see you as a sadhu, they do not do it because they are generally very respectful. But there's a tendency that you might find a 5 or a 7 or a 10-year-old who is motivated from within, who would just throw colors at you because he doesn't distinguish who is in front of him. And those colors are very difficult to remove. I do not know what they use. The interesting fact is, in Vrindavan, the next day after Holi, the road is covered with gulal up to 5 or 6 inches. It's like sand. There's been so much color and powder that's been thrown and strewn that it goes on for 5 days. It's a very big festival. All temples participate, and they're very special songs, but very loud songs. And the devotees come and they dance, and they have all kinds of celebrations in Barsana. Different places in Braj celebrate Holi on different days. So it's almost like 5 days. Then you'll find the roads covered with this color, almost around 4 or 5 inches thick color. And they would cut power. The local authorities are worried that because of all these crowds and their behavior, there might be some kind of an accident. So they cut power. So you will not have power on the whole day. So it's very, very interesting to see Holi being celebrated here in Braj. Now, as I was mentioning, the mode of ignorance is an experience. The mode of ignorance is an experience because we have been in a sandbox and we have had very bad experiences in the sandbox in the previous lifetimes, as we were fooling around with our time, thinking that we were engaging in something super important. In reality, from the perspective of the Devas and from the perspective of the Creator, Lord Brahma, from the perspective of the residents of the spiritual sky, all we have been doing is we have been fooling around in a sandbox like a kid. And sometimes one gets a very bad experience. And those experiences leave a blemish because the mode of ignorance is very, very difficult to remove. People carry it from one lifetime to another. It alters behavior. Many of the phobias and many of the disturbances that we see, mental issues in the present lifetime, are because there have been some kind of deep impressions, samskaras of the mode of ignorance in the past. It has left such a deep scar that when the time comes, it manifests and it creates distortion in behavior. And it's very, very difficult to remove because it's very deep. The mode of ignorance leaves that kind of a memory. It's almost like going through a bad experience and you can't shake it off. It's very difficult. So in a similar fashion, the mode of ignorance and the mode of passion and the mode of goodness in the material sky, these are manifestations of our behavior. And our behavior and our desires of the present lifetime are facilitated by Krishna because he gives us free will just as much as a kid is allowed to do anything they want within the scope of the sandbox. It's frightening to think that we as adults have all been doing is playing in a sandbox. And we make plans within the sandbox. We execute plans within the sandbox and feel great pride. Yeah, we feel great sorrow when the castles built in the sandbox are destroyed. And we develop relationships in the sandbox. It is just frightening to just think that all we have been doing is behaving like dysfunctional children who need a preoccupation, otherwise they would become very destructive. So this is what Lord Brahma does, which is according to scripture. So I'm not making it up. He practically manifests the material universe based on the fruitive desires of the living entities who are carried from one creation to the next. When there's a dissolution of creation, they're absorbed and then they are carried. So the fruitive desires are not gone because it's like an impression. So those particular fruitive desires have to manifest the second universe. Yeah. So in reality, there's only one reality. There's only the spiritual reality. The other is a sandbox. It is real, but it is a sandbox. It is temporary by nature. Lord Balaram, he carries the potency of Sandini, the Sat potency, and then there is Chit, and then which is the knowledge potency, and then there is Hladini, the pleasure potency. All of these are qualities of Krishna, Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Now, there are three different manifestations or realities. And these three realities are, there is Chit, Jagat, that which is completely spiritual, where there is absolutely no interference from material contamination. Specifically, the lower modes of nature have nothing to do there in the Chit Jagat. Then there is Jiva Jagat, and then there is Maya Jagat. These are three different manifestations of creation. One is the spiritual creation with its Chit Jagat, and the spiritual creation, the same Samdini potency, which is Sat, and the Chit, which is Samvit, which is cognizance, being aware of one being spiritual. Sandini is Sat, which is practically the continuation of the spiritual journey. That is Balaram's potency. So if there are interruptions in the spiritual journey, then the manifestation of the potency of Lord Balaram, prayers to Lord Nityananda are absolutely required, because then the interruptions to the spiritual journey are restored, because that is the potency of Lord Balaram. So the Sat potency, which is the eternality potency, the eternality of spiritual sky, comes from Lord Balaram. And Lord Balaram is the origin of all avatars. All avatars. He is practically the origin of all avatars. He himself, of course, is the first expansion of Krishna. Krishna is the origin, but in reality, in terms of management of the universe, it is Lord Balaram. So that is the greatness of Lord Balaram. So when there is a weakness in the heart, and when there are disturbances that are caused due to coming in touch with material nature, we call this Hridaya Durbalya, weakness of the heart in being able to execute devotional service. That weakness is very specifically rectified by calling upon Lord Nityananda's names. Lord Nitai, who is non-different from Balaram, will restore the eternal spiritual connection, Sat. So if there are interruptions in devotional service, they are being restored by Lord Nitai and by Guru, who is a representative of Nitai. It is being restored, which is the reason why the whole concept of being able to develop spiritual strength and to continue our journey comes from Shri Guru. The worship of Shri Guru, who is a representative of Lord Nitai, is practically required to ensure that we are able to move forward. What is the strength? What is the Sandini? Sandini is called Bala. Sandini is called Bala. Chit is called Jnana. And then you have Hladini, which is Ananda, joy. Now, Bala, the strength, means that Lord Balaram, as he was attracted from the womb of Mother Devaki into the womb of Mother Rohini, he was attracted. That is why he was called Sankarshana. Because the Akarshana Shakti, Akarshana is to attract. That comes from Balaram. So that is great, great power. So this Akarshana comes from Balaram. That is why the Guru has the ability to attract. That potency is Lord Balaram's potency. Harinam has the ability to attract. Krishna's pastimes has the ability to attract. Krishna himself has the ability to attract. That is the potency of Balaram. So he practically attracts us and then brings us to Krishna. So this is Sandini, to give us an eternal taste. Then there is Samvit. Samvit practically is the cognizance potency. Cognizance and becoming, knowing of our Sambandha, understanding our connection to Krishna, and then being able to act according to that connection is Samvit. And then you have the pleasure potency of Hladini. Now, the pleasure potency of Hladini is how we experience Prema. Samvit is how we engage in Abhida, which is service, because we understand our relationship. We establish our eternal relationship, which is through Sat, and then we understand our eternal relationship, and then we are able to engage in service. And then Prema and Bhava are the gifts of Hladini. So this is how the Jiva practically has the ability to go back to the spiritual sky. Now, the same potencies of Sat, Chit, and Ananda, Sandhini, Samvit, and Hladini, they play a role in three different dimensions. The first dimension is the Chit Jagat, which is the spiritual sky. And in the spiritual sky, they manifest the spiritual sky, they manifest the pastimes, they manifest paraphernalia, they manifest all kinds of wonderful interactions. And here, there's absolutely no influence of nescience, there's no influence of the material energy, nothing at all. The same Sandhini, Samvit, and Hladini, which is the Sat, Chit, and Ananda, when it interacts with Jiva Shakti in the Jiva Jagat, then you have the concept of the Jiva being qualitatively the same as Krishna, Brahman. So Jiva Shakti is Brahman, because you see, we are a part and parcel of Brahman, which is the potency of the Lord. We are a part and parcel of that. We experience that particular connection because we are a part and parcel of Krishna's Brahman. Isn't it? We are a part and parcel of his Brahman. Now, this is basically the Jiva Jagat, because even here there is Sandhini, there is Samvit, and there is Hladini. And in the Brahman realization, the Jiva experiences Hladini as Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. We read about it, na sochati, na kinchati. There are no worries. There are no worries because the Jiva practically experiences Hladini, Ananda, in Brahman. The Jiva experiences cognizance. So the Jiva realizes that they are not this body. They are Brahman. They are a part of this Brahman. Yeah, that is basically cognizance. Then the Jiva also experiences eternality because qualitatively they are the same as Krishna's potency. So now the Jiva, being marginal, is minute, but there is a certain dimension which they identify with before they come in touch with the mercy of Balaram. The mercy of Balaram practically gives them knowledge, gives them and puts them in touch with Krishna, gives them cognizance of who they are. So they go from understanding that they are a part and parcel of Brahman, which is Brahman realization, to understanding that I am a servant of the Lord. I basically am supposed to do this kind of service. I am supposed to surrender to him. This is my business. I do not have an existence independent of Krishna. This understanding comes in the spiritual sky. In Brahman realization, that understanding is limited. All they understand is that they are a part and parcel of Krishna's potency. The Jiva understands that they are qualitatively the same, even though they are minuscule. They are very minute in their ability to even conceive of Krishna's potency, but then they understand that they are a part of it. Then the Ananda, the experience, the joy they experience is practically the joy that is described in Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. They feel very joyful. It is because there are no worries. There's no anxiety. Yeah, all the kleshas have disappeared, so they feel that they are being liberated. So the joy of liberation comes from Hladini, but at a sub-level when it is in the Jiva Jagat. It is not in the spiritual sky. It is basically a part of what we would call as the Jiva experiencing the qualitative oneness with Krishna. Then the same Sandhini, Samvit, and Hladini, which is Sat, Chit, and Ananda, they manifest and they actually create the material universe, which is what we are reading about. Because even the creation of the material universe is the potency of Balaram. So there is Sandhini, there is Samvit, there is Hladini, there is Sat, there is Chit, there is Ananda. But then everything is distorted in the material world. Sat may be many, many years the lifetime of Lord Brahma. So one may say that if one lives for trillions of years, one can call themselves eternal, but in reality they are not, because even Lord Brahma has a lifespan. he has a lifespan and he has to depart when there's complete destruction. So the same Sandhini potency manifests a reality, but it is temporary. It is Lord Balaram's potency, but it is a distorted feature where there's a focus on Kala, which is basically the manifestation of time in the material universe, which brings about a destructive nature. Then you have cognizance. What is the cognizance? The jiva, for example, knowing themselves as somebody is Chit, Vaibhava, it is Samvit, isn't it? In the spiritual sky, we identify as Krishna's servants. In Brahman, we identify qualitatively as a part and parcel of Krishna. In the material sky, we have names. We call ourselves such and such. We call ourselves a part, a part of a certain country. We identify with race. We identify with a certain kind of ethnic minority, so on and so forth, languages. It is the same cognizance potency of Lord Balaram, but it is highly temporary, distorted, and it is practically, I would say, being in touch with the material sky means that this knowledge is false, it is illusory, because it's all temporary. But then this idea of being someone, calling ourselves a certain name, all of this is also a part of the manifestation of Lord Balaram's potency, but in the material sky. So it's a very dim reflection. It is practically a distortion, a perversion. The Ananda, Hladini, is also present in the material manifestation, but it is highly distorted. It is distorted, it is perverted, because here the jiva pursues bodily happiness and cries when there isn't any bodily happiness. Remember the sandbox example. Here the jiva has to experience Sat Chit and Ananda, identifying fully with the body and its surroundings. And it is highly limited and distorted and very, I would say, very, very painful. And these pains sometimes is carried on from one lifetime to another, because there are very painful experiences. You bring it over, and then it becomes all kinds of troubled circumstances in the subsequent lifetime. Now, the point is, Lord Brahma is speaking in Srimad Bhagavatam, and he is giving us clarity, and he is actually bringing us cognizance that you are in a sandbox. I'm creating this sandbox, and I don't have powers to create the sandbox. This creative energy is being provided for by an expansion of Balaram. If you choose to fall at the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda and ask for Harinam, then you're connecting to the spiritual sky. If you choose to fall at the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda and then ask for peace in life, then you are connecting to Brahman. If you fall at the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda and we ask for more toys to play with in the sandbox, then we are connecting to the distorted feature of the material sky. So Lord Brahma is practically giving us a very straightforward representation that this is a very troubled, straightforward circumstance, that I am creating a sandbox for you. And your fruitive desires are generally very tamasic. And those fruitive desires themselves are manifested by the potency of the Lord, who has capacity to give you eternal life, but then you're choosing something very minimal and somewhat subdued. This is being spoken of by Lord Brahma. Why should we take Lord Brahma's statements seriously? First and foremost, he is the head of our parampara. He is the head of our parampara. We are Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya Sampradaya. Our origin is Lord Brahma. Then Lord Brahma is instructing Sri Narad Muni. Sri Narad Muni is instructing Bhagavan Sri Vyasadeva. Both Narad Muni, Vyasadeva, and Lord Brahma are incarnations. Lord Brahma is a Guna avatar. Sri Narad Muni is an avatar who is Sakti Avesha, who has the ability to give bhakti under the most difficult of circumstances. Fascinating personality. He is practically involved in every scripture right at the origin to give motivation, to give blessings, and to give the body of knowledge to Sri Valmiki in Ramayana, Lord Vyasa in all the Puranas and the Srimad Bhagavatam, etc. And then from Sri Vyasa, we have a lineage, and Mahaprabhu chose to get initiated in this lineage. So as a consequence, we are connected to Lord Brahma. So he is the Sampradaya head. He is heading the Sampradaya. If you go down south to the Ramanuja Sampradaya, the head of the Sampradaya is Mother Lakshmi. Yeah, Sri Sampradaya. Then you have Rudra Sampradaya. Then you have Kumara Sampradaya. So these are all 4 bona fide Vaishnava Sampradayas, headed by personalities who are directly in touch with the Lord in different capacities. And they have the realizations and they have the lineages and they have their, what we would call as teachings. And ours comes from Lord Brahma, so he is the head of the Sampradaya, so we ought to take him very seriously. Yeah, because he's giving us instructions. But then what is this instruction that's been given in the 3rd canto? 3rd canto is all about activity, modification of activity, and desires. So he's practically telling us that you have a golden opportunity to connect back to the spiritual sky if you come in touch with Balaram. And we are all very fortunate that we are coming in touch with Balaram in his merciful, most merciful aspect of Lord Nityananda. Then he is also giving us cognizance that everything is being done because of your desires, and all you're doing is you're just basically going to play in a sandbox. He's giving us that particular notion that I am getting the creative potency, my knowledge is coming from the desires and everything else that is being manifest, and the Lord is giving me cognizance of how to create an environment, but this whole environment is nothing but the manifestation of Sandhini, but it is distorted. Just as much as you have spiritual potency, now this is material energy, this is external energy. There's Maya Shakti, there's Jiva Shakti, and then there is Chitta Shakti. Chitta Shakti is the spiritual sky, and then you have Maya Shakti, which is the external energy, and then you have Jivas who are Tatastha, who have their potency, but they are minuscule, they're minute, and they're connected to the Lord qualitatively. So as a consequence, all of this is to prepare us to choose properly. It is to bring us to a point where we realize that as we make plans for our life, we should be very careful about the concept of the sandbox. How much of our plans are aligned with the desire of Lord Nityananda? What is the desire of Lord Nityananda? He carries the desire of Lord Chaitanya in his heart. He wants us to come back. He cries if we don't come back. He practically manifests potency in different parts of the world just so that we can experience what it is for us to be able to experience real prema. What we are experiencing here is Hladini in the material world, right? Is a distortion, it's a perversion. It is very, very minute quantity of pleasure, which is temporary. Because Sat is Asat here, it is temporary. Yeah. And then we are identifying with the physical body and the physical environment. So the Chit Vaibhava is also distorted. As a consequence, one can't really experience happiness here. Lord Nityananda wants us to experience eternal happiness, serving the divine couple. So he's giving us mercy and he's distributing that mercy. So Lord Brahma is wanting us to understand how complex a jiva's journey is and how serious an endeavor it is for manifesting this playground for us, and how serious an endeavor it is if we come in touch with the potency of Lord Nityananda, we come in touch with the what we would call as the origin of everything, and then we neglect it and we choose a sandbox to come back to lifetime after lifetime. It's a very ridiculous proposition, but we have been doing it. So we can't really say that we are beyond that propensity in this lifetime. So we need to offer prayers, we need to hold on to the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada at any given time, hold on to the bead bags and chant very seriously, because we have made mistakes all along. We have made mistakes all along. We do not want to have a repetition of the same mistakes lifetime after lifetime. To assume that this lifetime is okay is a folly. We have been given mercy, but we are yet to graduate. We have been given an opportunity to enter into the most confidential, extraordinarily rare connection with Lord Chaitanya. But it is very easy for us to get distracted and make plans in this world because we're stimulated by material energy. We're stimulated by material identities. and we are stimulated by the so-called very brief pleasure of this world. We are stimulated by our peers at work. We are stimulated by what we see as advertisements. So it's a very dangerous circumstance unless one is able to constantly bring their attention to the fact that this opportunity is rare, and number two, we don't deserve this. Because one of the most important factors which make devotees take Krishna consciousness lightly is when they start assuming and thinking that they deserve this experience. They somehow think that we are qualified. As a consequence, we have come. We are qualified to be here. Actually, nobody is qualified to be a part of Lord Chaitanya's mercy. No one is. It is being distributed by Lord Nityananda. It is being distributed freely. This is Lord Nityananda's game plan. He's just distributing everything freely on the streets, both in the streets of India and the West. Lord Nityananda is empowering and he's distributing a very, very rare gift. But most of us, practically all of us, do not have any qualification to be a part of this journey. So that's why, as one advances in spirituality, when one advances in Krishna consciousness, they become very cognizant and become fearful of committing offenses. They become very cognizant of the gift that has been given. And they hold on to the gift because it's very rare, because they become aware of how powerful and how rare the gift is. So we want to understand that very clearly from this chapter. When Lord Brahma is actually offering prayers and he is practically talking about people being distracted, we should be very careful in understanding that this can be us because we come from that position. We have done it in the past. So to simply think that something happened in the past and it wouldn't happen in the future will not be appropriate. So is this a negative statement? Should one be in fear at all times? Yes, hold on to your beadbags. Hold on to your beadbags. Just be afraid of not losing the beadbag. There's no other fear. In fact, in reality, if you hold on to the beadbag, there really isn't any fear. And life can be fearless. But yes, we have to be afraid of somehow or the other being conned by the distortions of this world and being enticed by the sandbox and its various manifestations, where we become so distracted that we set goals within the sandbox, not realizing that someone is going to come and kick those sand castles away, and we're going to cry at some point. So we need to be very, very careful, and we need to offer prayers, which is why, even though our acharyas were residents of the spiritual sky, they were all eternal servants of the Lord. They were all Nitya Siddhas, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Narottam Das Thakur. If you read their work, Raghunath Das Goswami, the Goswamis, if you read their work and you understand their behavior, you will find a very deep sense of humility, almost as if their behavior signifies that what has been given to them is a very rare thing. They don't feel qualified to be part of Lord Chaitanya's entourage. You will actually come across this very deeply humble writings of our acharyas. So these are not insincere statements. These are deeply felt. These are deeply felt because they've experienced the real thing. And because they've experienced the real thing, they also feel so unqualified to be a part of such spiritual reality that they write out of their realization. We ought to read those prayers of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. We have to read those prayers of Srila Narottam Das Thakur and Raghunath Das Goswami and the other Goswamis. So we understand that this is very sincere. They are afraid. They are begging for mercy, even though they have received everything. They are afraid. So this is something which is very important for us to remember. So offer prayers. Srila Prabhupada, we mentioned in the previous session when someone asked a question, that Srila Prabhupada used to stand before the deities as he used to visit a specific temple. And he used to make a statement saying that I'm just asking that I don't fall down. This is Srila Prabhupada. He was a resident of the spiritual sky, and he used to say that I don't want to fall down, and I just want to ask. So this is a very appropriate prayer. a very appropriate prayer to ask the deities, a very appropriate prayer to ask Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya to somehow or the other ensure that we do not get distracted in this lifetime and we're able to hold on to the mercy that's been given to us so graciously and so generously by Lord Chaitanya's arrangement, by Srila Prabhupada's arrangement. Yeah, it's just incredible. It is incredible how 100 years back, there wasn't a valid copy of Srimad Bhagavatam. During Bhaktivinoda Thakur's time, as he was searching for a set of Bhagavatam which was bona fide, he couldn't find one very easily. Not very surprising, simply because the printing presses, etc., were not fully functional 150 years back when he was searching for what I would call as bona fide literature which was preserved, but it was very rare. But then today we have Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the origin, which is practically the source of inspiration for even Mahavishnu. Yeah, we have Srimad Bhagavatam in our fingertips, on our little phones, on our iPads, whatsoever. And it is so easy for us to access multiple copies of Srimad Bhagavatam as Srila Prabhupada's servants distributed. And it is just, this mercy is just unprecedented. It is unprecedented. The worrisome prospect is, if I were to lose this opportunity to take this advantage of this mercy, what would happen in the future? Will I have a similar opportunity? Will I have a body and a surrounding and a family and so on and so forth, which is not as disturbing as, in a sense, which is not going to be disturbing me? We do not know. So we want to offer prayers and we want to take advantage of the present circumstances. So plan for prioritizing on a daily basis today, because we do not want to leave things for the future. I was just mentioning about B.B. Govind Maharaj, His Holiness B.B. Govind Maharaj. He is isolating in my building. His house is just next door. And as a consequence, his servant passed away a couple of weeks back. He was actually an extraordinarily young, very healthy Brajavasi devotee. And it is just hard to believe that he's not there. He's gone. So the question is, how serious should we be in the present circumstances where the normal circumstances of life seem to be challenged a little bit more than usual? We should be even more cognizant. We should be even more careful about the circumstances. Senior Vaishnavas, Prabhupada disciples are disappearing. They are disappearing in an alarming rate. We had His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj last year. This year, we already have so many devotees, Pankajangri Prabhu last week. So this is a very disturbing trend where they have contributed so much to our lives and we don't have their association, physically speaking, anymore. So we should be very careful, and we should also understand very clearly that every day is precious, and a deeper understanding of why we are here and what we want to do in life needs to be constantly revisited. We need to write down on a daily basis. We need to come in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam. We need to come in touch with Harinam. We need to come in touch with the Dham, the deities, all the potencies which Krishna manifests, so that we are enthused for many, many years to come. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I've summarized, and I will just read a few verses as I usually do, and then we will go on to questions. Just give me one moment. I'm just getting to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, this does not mean that we ought to be in fear, but we ought to be in fear of losing the opportunity. That is a certainty. We ought to be in fear of losing the opportunity. That fear is useful. Yeah, that fear is useful. That's what is going to allow us to beg for help. Yeah. Complacency and Krishna consciousness go ill together. As Prabhupada used to say, we cannot be complacent, and the present circumstances are such that you cannot be complacent whatsoever. So complacency should practically end. All right, so this is chapter 9 of the 3rd canto. I'm just going to read the English to save time. Lord Brahmā said, "O my Lord, today, after many, many years of penance, have come to know about you. Or how unfortunate the embodied living entities are that they are unable to know your personality. My Lord, you're the only knowable object because there's nothing supreme beyond you. If there is anything supposedly superior to you, it is not the absolute. You exist as the supreme by exhibiting the creative energy of matter. So here Lord Brahma is practically stressing how unfortunate the embodied living entities are that they're unable to know your personality. And how fortunate are we that we have come to know so much about Krishna through Srila Prabhupada's potency. How fortunate are we? This is just the opposite of this particular statement. We have been given so much mercy. The form which I see is eternally freed from material contamination and has advented to show mercy to the devotee as a manifestation of internal potency. The incarnation is the origin of many other incarnations. I am born from the lotus flower grown from your navel home. So, the body of the Lord, of course, is completely free from material contamination because this is the potency of Lord Balaram. It is completely spiritual. So, Lord Brahma is speaking of cognizance and identification with the Lord's potency and of Sat, which is eternal. And he is practically talking about how the origin of all incarnations is Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, because his expansion is Kshirodakashayi Vishnu, and then from him you have every other incarnation. O my Lord, I do not see a form superior to your present form of eternal bliss and knowledge. In your impersonal Brahman effulgence in the spiritual sky, there is no occasional change and no deterioration of internal potency. I surrender unto you because whereas I'm proud of my material body and senses, your lordship is the cause of the cosmic manifestation, and yet you are untouched by matter. So Lord Brahma is practically giving us a very simple example. We are extraordinarily minute in our capacity compared to Lord Brahma. We are Jiva Tattva. Lord Brahma is Jiva Tattva, but then his potency is far, far greater than our potency. And his potency to create is far greater than our potency to create. We are so proud of our little accomplishments in life, which we have practically manifested due to our creative potency. And Lord Brahma is saying, I was so proud of all the stuff that I did, which is the creation. But then I understand that you are the cause of all the opulences I display. This present form, or any transcendental form expanded by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is equally auspicious for all the universes. Since you have manifested this eternal personal form upon which your devotees meditate, I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Those who are destined to be dispatched to the path of hell neglect your personal form because of speculating on material topics. Because there's so much speculation. There's been so much distortion, speculation, even back then when the Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken, there were multiple theories. There were intellectuals, there were skeptics, and he is practically referring to those skeptics and the intellectuals whose speculations practically take them away from the topic of transcendence and cover their ability to understand Krishna. Because in the previous chapter, Lord Brahma goes down in the lotus stem and he is unable to find Krishna. He is unable to find the origin of the navel. Then he starts offering prayers, and that is when he practically is able to see his origin. So it is not so much a manifestation of being close to transcendence. You can be next to transcendence, and we would not understand it without mercy. So the mercy potency came, and as a consequence, he was able to understand things. Yeah. So the problem is that if the path chosen by the jiva is a path of ascending knowledge, which means that you're going up and you're trying to go higher based on your effort, then there's a tremendous amount of speculation that is generated, and there are many lifetimes that could be lost in just the speculative activity. The process of Krishna consciousness is descending. We practically have to open ourselves out and we surrender to receive. The mercy is coming from above. So our whole process of Krishna consciousness is being managed by mercy. It's being managed by Krishna. We just have to position ourselves to receive that mercy. The whole objective of sadhana bhakti is to position ourselves so that we could receive mercy that's descending. So our process is descending, where mercy is coming down, it's picking us up. Our effort is to position ourselves so that we can receive that mercy adequately. And we do that through chanting, we do that through the 5 principal processes of devotional service, which is association, chanting, Srimad Bhagavatam, the deity worship, and also being able to visit the Dham and having deep desires of wanting to serve Vrindavan, Mayapur, etc. So our process is descending. We need to basically position ourselves. And the positioning is done by following the precept of those who walked on the planet before us, who were very successful and who were very kind to share their realizations, were very kind to share their experiences. So the authoring of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the summary of which is Nectar of Devotion, but Srila Rupa Goswami shared his experience of the process of devotional service and the different stages of devotional service. Sri Harinam Chintamani was shared by the Namacharya himself. If you were to sincerely offer prayers to Sri Haridas Thakur before you begin your japa, sincerely offer prayers. This can be heartfelt prayers. You will find your japa quality improve, because he is the Namacharya. He's very merciful. He and Lord Nityananda were a team who distributed mercy in Bengal. So as a consequence, he is used to distributing mercy along with Lord Nityananda. We should definitely remember the Namacharya when we call upon Harinam, requesting him to bestow his potency so that we could do what is necessary, so that we could depend on Harinam as he depended on Harinam. Yeah. So the idea of reading prayers written by our acharyas is so that we can somehow or the other develop role models. We can develop role models amongst our predecessors, and we start offering prayers to them to somehow bestow their mercy so that we could understand their intentions while writing those prayers. You cannot understand prayers of exalted souls without their mercy. So if you're reading Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prayers, call upon him and request mercy, and all our predecessors are accessible. Everybody is accessible in the parampara, depending on how sincere we are. Yeah, they are. So when you're reading Srila Narottam Das Thakur's prayers, do the same, because without his mercy, you can't understand his prayers. We may think we have understood it because they're simple enough, but then you can't understand the depth. We cannot understand the emotion, and his mercy is required. So the speculation that goes on is practically because they are in touch with distortion. The same potency of chit potency, cognizance, samvit, is distorted when it comes to the material world, and that distortion produces all kinds of speculation. And you will find that that speculation can occur even 5,000 years ago. It can occur 10,000 years ago when the Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken. Yeah, it is quite interesting to note that material energy is so powerful that it could cause confusion even back then, when the atmosphere was saturated with the mode of goodness, and you could come in touch with great personalities. And in fact, it is very interesting. Sri Maitreya, he was a great personality. He was the disciple of Sri Parashara, and he was basically endowed with all kinds of spiritual qualities, and he was a transcendentally well-situated personality. However, he needed to have the experience of Vraja Bhakti. He needed to have an understanding of the mood of the Vraja Bhakta, because the 64 opulences of Krishna has 64. One of them is the Prema Madhurya. We spoke about it in the previous session. And Prema Madhurya means there's a certain quality in the devotees of Krishna which particularly are not found in the Vaikuntha planets. So Sri Maitreya was strategically brought in front of Krishna at the time of his departure, and he was introduced, or rather, he also had Uddhava, Sri Uddhava, who was a very close confidential devotee of Krishna, along with him. So Uddhava's words, basically, and the interaction between him and Krishna became instructive to Sri Maitreya. So in a similar fashion, what I'm trying to say is you could have been on the planet 5,000, 6,000 years ago, and you could have received transcendental knowledge, but there were so many different layers of confidential transcendental knowledge that it required mercy to come in touch with such knowledge. So Sri Maitreya, the speaker of these chapters, received mercy from Krishna himself because he was qualified, and that mercy was the association of Uddhava. Sri Uddhava received mercy by going to Vraja to represent Krishna amongst the gopis and before Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj. He received mercy as well because he didn't know what Vraja Bhakti was. He was a Gyani Bhakta. He was extraordinarily powerfully cognizant of the Vaikuntha platform, the Dwaraka platform, but he didn't know the sweetness of Vraja. So he was not fully cognizant of the sweetness of Vraja. And as a consequence, he had to come in touch with the mercy of the Vraja Bhaktas. And that's why Krishna sent him to Vraja as a messenger. So these are arrangements by the Lord, which are descending arrangements. I'm using the word descending to indicate that this is kripa, this is being bestowed upon the devotee because they are well situated to receive such kripa. That's our business too. All we have to do is position ourselves so that we can receive mercy. This is the only mandate before us. And our whole sadhana is all about positioning ourselves. We'll have to check ourselves at each and every point to see whether Guru would be pleased, whether Prabhupada would be pleased, whether Krishna would be pleased with my endeavor, with my behavior, with the way I'm representing them. This is very important because we are positioning ourselves very carefully. We are positioning ourselves to receive, which means we are actually positioning ourselves to beg. A beggar, an efficient beggar, needs to know how to beg. That's who we are. We are beggars. We are not royals. We are beggars. We have no authority over what's being given to us. As a consequence, we have to position ourselves to beg. Imagine an authoritative beggar. Imagine an upstart, very self-conceited upstart who is very arrogant, but then he also has a begging bowl. How enthused would be anyone who wants to provide some kind of alms to such a beggar? So we ought to learn how to beg. We ought to learn how to beg, which is the whole business of sadhana bhakti, is to position ourselves so that we could beg for mercy. Because that's all we can do. We can beg for mercy and we can endeavor, we can give ourselves, and then the mercy itself propels us to serve in a very efficient way. So this is very important for us to realize that when Lord Brahma is offering prayers, he is practically, he hit a dead wall in the previous chapter. He descended, and this is Brahma with all the creative potency. He's a Gunavatar. He couldn't see the Lord. He couldn't see his origin. He did not know what he had to do. His creative potency was quite subdued. He didn't really know what to do. Then he is giving us education here that he has to submit himself. He had to submit himself, and that allowed him to receive instructions. He followed those instructions of chanting and tapasya, and that allowed him to have vision of the Lord and receive direct instructions to understand the Lord's heart. So we are following the same process. We are learning to surrender, and when we surrender, we would have the ability, to serve nicely. So we are learning to love, and from love comes surrender, proper surrender, and then we would also be able to serve nicely. That's our process, which is what Lord Brahma is also talking. Okay, I'm going to stop with verse 5. O my Lord, persons who smell the aroma of your lotus feet, carried by the air of Vedic sound through the holes of the ears, accept your devotional service. For them, you're never separated from the lotus of their hearts. See, this is coming in touch with Krishna, practically coming in touch with Krishna. This principle of resolving contradictions, of coming in touch with Krishna, because this is spiritual potency, it practically allows the devotee who is very sincere to experience Krishna through all the senses, So as we advance in Krishna consciousness and one reaches the stage of Ashakti and Bhava, then at that point the senses are free and the subtle body does not have any specific agenda, the mind does not have any agenda, there's no disturbance. So when someone is chanting, they're able to hear each and every syllable, and they relish each and every syllable because all the senses converge into the sense of hearing. So in a similar fashion, someone who has to receive mercy, they would receive mercy by a certain sense of smell. Yeah, they would be able to understand the potency and the manifestation of the Lord, and they would be able to experience the Lord by receiving mercy through the years from someone who has already had that experience. So when they hear the sound of someone who has experienced Krishna, then they develop the ability and understanding of what Krishna's aroma is. The aroma of his lotus feet becomes manifest by hearing from someone who has indeed had the opportunity to come in touch with the Lord's lotus feet and the aroma of the lotus feet. So this is all about being able to position ourselves so that we are able to hear and we are able to receive. That's why Shrunmatam Svatkata Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam is so important, because then it has the ability to dislodge passion and ignorance. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Abhadreshu is passion and ignorance. Passion and ignorance are the main ingredients of the sandbox. Going by an earlier example, they are the main ingredients of the sandbox, passion and ignorance, very, very destructive. And this passion and ignorance are called abhadreshu, that which is inauspicious. Bhadreshu is auspicious, abhadreshu is inauspicious. Then one hears Srimad Bhagavatam, then one has the ability to receive Srimad Bhagavatam in their heart, and all the nonsense, which is basically passion and ignorance, which are manifesting themselves as anarthas, they are manifesting themselves as aparad towards Harinam, aparad towards Seva, aparad towards the opportunity. All of that starts disappearing. So that's why Shrunmatam Swakata Krishna is being kept as the main theme of hearing, which is why Srimad Bhagavatam was heard by Parikshit Maharaj. The Parikshit Maharaj practically heard Srimad Bhagavatam, which is how Kali Yuga began, because reading Srimad Bhagavatam and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam are two different things. Reading Srimad Bhagavatam requires mercy, and that mercy comes by coming in touch with those who have read Srimad Bhagavatam and they have received mercy. So it's all a matter of receiving mercy. If someone has received mercy, they've been able to digest the subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam, they're able to connect the dots, then what does happen is that their intentions and their abilities and their understanding, their realizations, this is basically Sambandha Tattva. Krishna is Srimad Bhagavatam, and the devotee has deep Sambandha with Srimad Bhagavatam, then that Sambandha is also conveyed through sound vibrations, and those sound vibrations have the ability to give an understanding to those who have not come in touch with Krishna as to what is the aroma of the lotus feet of the Lord. Because the speaker has the ability to come in touch, and as a consequence, he is able to convey that particular input onto those who are attending Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is the idea of association. This is the whole concept which is being driven by Srimad Bhagavatam. We associate and we receive because someone could have experienced it, and they have the ability to give us the ability to experience things. So I'm going to end here. Of course, this is basically the beginning of the chapter, but these are prayers of Lord Brahma. We would continue again in the following week, but I want to set the theme. I want to set the theme that the personality who is talking to us now is the author. He is the creator of the sandbox that we are playing in. He knows our position. He is practically giving us a toy. He's practically putting us in a situation which is like a child. So setting our objectives within this sandbox is the calamitous decision that we have taken for several lifetimes, which has practically brought us to this lifetime. We have received mercy from Srila Prabhupada. We have received mercy from Lord Nityananda. But then if we don't remember that this is a sandbox and we create objectives within the sandbox which are not really connected to transcendence, then we are in trouble. But how do I know whether I'm creating an objective which is connected to Krishna? Because sometimes we could be creating objectives because we are in touch with material energy. Yes, that is a real risk. How do I know? I do not know. So what do? I offer prayers. I always offer prayers on a daily basis. I always request Krishna. Krishna, please, Krishna, if I am having a plan which is not approved by you, sabotage that plan. Be brave to come before Srila Prabhupada. Be brave and humble and to come before Srila Prabhupada on a daily basis and request him to sabotage our plans for life that practically would incarcerate us for several lifetimes. Let him sabotage those plans. After all, isn't it really prudent for us to say that if this is going to cause a problem, I do not know if it's going to cause a problem. What if I take a decision which is inappropriate and which is going to take me away from the Lord's mercy? So Krishna, if you think it's inappropriate, sabotage my plans. Just sabotage my ideas. Do not even allow these desires to come in which seem to basically take me away from you. They have taken me away from you for so many lifetimes. I do not want to go through it again. So these prayers from the heart are very important. These prayers have the root on Anyabilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karmadi Anavritam, Anukulena Krishna Anushilanam Bhakti Uttama. This is Uttama Bhakti. And Srila Jiva Goswami is all, sorry, Srila Rupa Goswami has already given us the sutra, the particular verse that we have to adapt to in life. He has already told us, don't desire things. Anya bilashita. Do not desire things that are practically fruitive, because you will simply be put into a sandbox. This is what Lord Brahma is trying to tell us. He's saying that if you don't practice the tenets of Sri Rupa Goswami of Anya bilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam, we will either experience Jiva Jagat, we might experience Maya Jagat, we may never get to Chit Jagat, which is where we want to go to, because that's the mercy that's been given to us. Yeah, it is like saying that someone boards a flight in New York City, and then they have a flight ticket all the way up to Los Angeles, which is the other side of the country, and then they basically use the flight ticket, and then they get down in Cincinnati near Ohio, or in Ohio, or they get down somewhere in Wisconsin, or one of those places, which is partial, which is midway. They're not really getting to Los Angeles. So it's very absurd for us to have received the flight ticket all the way back up to the spiritual sky. And then we make plans to get out either in the Brahma Jagat, or which is basically the Jiva Jagat, which is the Brahman realization part, where we want to basically have peace and we want to experience the joy of being free of the material world. Or we end up coming here to this horrible situation of just being put into a sandbox where we think we are very seriously contributing to life. In reality, all we are doing is building more and more opportunities for nations. So we ought to be very careful. So these chapters have a certain theme. I'm going to go with this theme. I might refine it as we go along, but I was just wanting to say that this is the theme. The Creator is telling us. The Creator is telling us that I'm creating a sandbox. We ought to take his words very seriously. That's the point. All right. So I'll stop here and I'll take questions from you. Okay, there seems to be a question on chat. Let me see. Who does Ram refer to in the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra? I've always assumed it's Lord Ram. A speaker we had on Ram Navami seemed to indicate it could refer to Lord Balaram too. In response to a question, is this correct? If so, how can there be ambiguity in something regarded as important as the Maha Mantra? There isn't an ambiguity. There really isn't. The Maha Mantra given by Lord Chaitanya, you see, the Maha Mantra given by Lord Chaitanya is particularly geared to take us to Vrajadam. In Vraja, Rama is Radhika Raman. Rama is the giver of pleasure. Rama indicates Krishna's ability to give pleasure. So in our Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is Radha and Krishna together, and the Rama literally refers to Radhika Raman. Now, one may say that why cannot it refer to Krishna and Rama? Of course, it can. If your objective is to reach the Vaikuntha planets, then you can reach the Vaikuntha planets with that understanding. So the point I'm just trying to make is that what is being indicated in the Mahamantra is Krishna and Radhika Raman. This is basically what the Mahamantra is. And this is the only thing which a the practitioner of Vrajabhakti would take up. We will take this up. Now, is Lord Ram's potency manifest in Vraja? Absolutely, he is. You can access Ayodhya from Vraja. You can access the planet of Lord Nrsimhadev from Vraja, because Krishna is the origin. Vraja is the origin of all mellows. So Lord Ram, if someone is very, very deeply attached to Lord Sri Ram, and they come here to Vraja, Sri Radha and Krishna would give them mercy as Sri Sita Ram. Yeah, they would, because Sri Sita Ram are contained within the potency of Sri Radha and Krishna. This is very important for us to understand, and which is the reason why Srimad Bhagavatam is the authority. Srimad Bhagavatam is practically telling us that Krishna is the avatari. He is the origin. He is the samam bonam, sarva karana karanam, and Srimad Bhagavatam is the authority. So we take the authority of Srimad Bhagavatam and we go with that. I am a Rama Bhakta, and I'm just disclosing this. I am a Rama Bhakta. I'm very inspired by Lord Sri Ram, and I have also lectured on Sri Ramanavami. And my understanding is that you cannot learn Dasya Bhakti, which is extraordinarily important to approach Lord Chaitanya, without understanding the mood of the servants of Lord Sri Ram in the Ramayana. So Lord Ram enthuses us to serve Lord Chaitanya, who gives us mercy to ultimately serve the divine couple, Sri Radha and Krishna. So I can, if you write to me on WhatsApp, I will forward the Ramanavami lecture that I had given last year. I think I spoke in Birmingham. I think it was the Ramanavami celebration in Birmingham, and I spoke, and this is basically how Lord Chaitanya manifested his Shadbhuja Rupa. He showed himself as Lord Ram. He showed himself as Lord Chaitanya, and then he also showed himself as Krishna. So what is the reason for this? The confidential reason is that we need to understand the Dasya Bhakti of Lord Ram's servants, and we need to follow the Maryada of Lord Sri Ram, because Lord Chaitanya was extraordinarily strict in his dealings in the world. We need to follow this as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. When we follow all of that and we take inspiration, then we have the ability to serve Lord Chaitanya as much as Lord Hanuman and Lakshmanji served Lord Ram. They were single-pointedly focused on service. So that's the greatest inspiration of Sri Ramayana, is that everything was dependent on Lord Sri Ram's desires. Hanumanji's service and accomplishments were completely based on the potency of Lord Ram's names. So they served Lord Ram in such a way, it was so powerful and so inspiring. Then we develop inspiration and we develop the strict behavior that is required to approach Lord Chaitanya, because he was very strict, Lord Chaitanya, in his dealings. He was very, very strict. And when we approach Lord Chaitanya and we carry this extraordinary sense of duty, as Lakshman did and Hanumanji did in Ramayana, and we serve them, we serve day and night with this extraordinary sense of duty, then we receive mercy from Lord Chaitanya, which is the whole purport of the connection between Lord Sri Ram, Lord Chaitanya, and Krishna. So to summarize, it is not a contradiction, and there isn't ambiguity. There's clarity. It is a matter of understanding that Krishna is the avatari, and Hare Ram refers to Radhika Raman, but the same Radhika Raman manifests in the heart of a Rama Bhakta as Sri Sita Ram. This requires sincere chanting. This requires understanding Srimad Bhagavatam, then this would be manifest. Yeah, in Vraja, that's how it goes. This is how exactly it works. I hope this is clear to you. All right. Is there any other question?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes. Am I clear? Is this audible?
Yes, it is. That's fine. Yes, that's
Haribol?
good. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Thank you for wonderful points you've raised. I just got a question about you said about positioning ourselves for mercy, and just 2 points. Srila Prabhupada talks about simple living and high thinking, and as we know, this material world in Kali Yuga is a very, very, very troublesome place. And when someone suffers, they suffer immensely. For example, a quick example to understand is the oxygen issue, like it is in India. Short supplies, people struggling for medication, etc. So when people suffer, they suffer like anything. So now in this age of Kali, you mentioned about positioning ourselves, um, begging for the mercy, but the simple living and high thinking gives us an opportunity to position ourselves for mercy. But Srila Prabhupada also mentioned that even in the age of Kali, progressively, it's going to be even more difficult to even have simple living and high thinking. Simple living and high thinking will also be a very difficult task, very difficult to do. So how do we ensure that we put ourselves in situations where things are favorable, where we are able to live simply, have simple living and high thinking? And secondly, the sandbox that you're referring to, can the sandbox be converted from material to spiritual?
Okay. We'll take one question at a time. So I'll go with the first one, and then I'll come to the second in that order. So very important for us to realize that simple living is a psychological state. And when I say psychological state, simplicity is a symptom of the mode of goodness. It's practically the mode of goodness. If something is very complex, it requires the mode of passion to operate. Then we are descending from mode of goodness to passion. So when Srila Prabhupada said simple living, high thinking, he wanted things as close as possible to a psychological state which would suit the devotee to embrace the mode of goodness. They would be able to use the mode of goodness as a platform, and then they would be able to take off from the mode of goodness. Because if you create complexity in life, then that requires the mode of passion, which is the actual issue faced by devotees. As devotees participate in life and they start life, for instance, at a very young age, then they add complexity as they go along. So the house becomes bigger, then you have more houses, then you have more cars, more complexity as you go along. And this complexity requires the mode of passion to manage, because you really can't manage a complex circumstance being in the mode of goodness where you practically, you can't take care of it. It requires endeavor, it requires thinking, it requires agitation of the mind to protect this and protect that. So this is the issue with devotees, is that they do not have the objective of understanding that this is a sandbox and you need to set plans in such a way that you need to create an environment that is not very complex, because that would allow us to focus on Harinam. So over a period of time, it is encouraged that devotees wean themselves away from a complexity of full participation in the material world, and instead they slowly, steadily start increasing the quality and absorption in service as their material quest comes to an end, which means resolve the material issue by setting a certain goal, do not keep it as a lifelong endeavor, because a lifelong endeavor means that lifelong the devotee is going to be in passion. If, on the other hand, they simplify their finances, they simplify whatever they have to do, then they have the ability to psychologically not need the mode of passion to meet their day-to-day requirement. They can depend on a more simple structure that doesn't require too much agitation. So, and what that is, it differs from devotee to devotee, but I'm just wanting to say that this is the real issue in our movement. In our movement, we have an issue of devotees wanting to immerse themselves in passion and yet wanting to be able to chant quality rounds. It's not going to work. There has to be an endeavor. There has to be a plan to exit. There has to be deeper absorption in service on a
Oh, sorry, you cut out now. I can't hear you.
Hare Krishna, I'm back. I'm sorry, I got cut off. Is everyone able to hear me now?
Yes, Prabhu.
Can anyone?
Yes, yes, can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So, yes, thank you. Yeah, this is a little bit of a quirk. Anyways, basically the point is that devotees need a plan. If you don't plan, then Maya is going to plan for us. Material energy is going to plan with all its complexity. So we need to kind of have a plan to exit and become more absorbed in devotional service. Now, this answers your second question, Bhaktiman Prabhu. This answers your second question as to whether there's a possibility of being able to connect to and transform the sandbox. The sandbox can be used just as much as you would use any environment, and you could dovetail and act as if you are in the Chit Jagat, which is the whole program of Krishna consciousness. The answer is yes, which is what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to give our time, we are supposed to give our resources, we are supposed to use our limbs, and we are supposed to do everything in such a way that we are able to dovetail our consciousness in the service of the Lord, which is the whole program. But being cognizant that the sandbox is complex enough to give us our goals is very important. We should not forget the fact that we are in touch with a circumstance that can practically incarcerate us for many lifetimes. We should be very, very careful with this. I hope
Does
this
that mean
answers your
this?
question.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, that's wonderful. Good points there. And does that mean that this sandbox is potentially a very dangerous condition? And what we really have to look out for is to understand how to come to this point of begging for mercy, because so many people are not even begging for mercy. In fact, they're probably doing totally the opposite. They don't have time. They don't make the expanse of time. They've not got the awareness of this. So is this is our positioning very?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So this material world, so this material situation, very, very dangerous situation, sandbox, potentially very dangerous. And yet, even knowing that it's dangerous, we're still not positioning ourselves for mercy. Is that what you're trying to point out too?
Yes, this is the whole objective of preaching. The whole idea of giving a class is to make people aware of and to inspire them to offer prayers. This is what we are trying to do. Yeah. And then we should also remember that the spiritual journey is being managed very intricately by the potency of the Lord. It is being managed very intricately by the parampara. And we shouldn't be completely fearful that we may not receive mercy, but we should definitely be fearful that our behavior could throw away what's been given. That's the point. Yeah. We want to basically understand that, yes, we're going to be looked after, which is the whole concept of Krishna consciousness, is dependence on Krishna. So we're going to be looked after, we're going to be nurtured. Krishna is going to remember us even if we don't remember him, right? Krito smara, kritam smara. So Krishna is going to remember us. However, we want to be afraid of not wanting to remember Krishna. We want to be afraid of forgetting him, so that we make every attempt and we take every opportunity possible for us to upgrade ourselves on a daily basis. Yeah, being in touch with Krishna consciousness requires effort, and that effort has already been demonstrated by our predecessors. We notice the Goswamis of Vrindavan, they were Nitya Siddhas. They were already on the platform of being directly in the spiritual sky with Krishna and Srimati Radharani. However, they followed very strictly their day-to-day behavior of chanting a certain number of rounds. They followed very strictly the day-to-day behavior of engaging in some kind of deity worship, going around the dham. And then they also engaged in paying obeisances, which practically is a manifestation of humility and understanding that the devotee is practically holding on and representing prema madhurya, which is the potency of the Lord. He is always surrounded by wonderful devotees, so we want to remember that. So this is the kind of behavior we want to inculcate by looking at the predecessors who were exalted but felt necessary and felt the necessity to constantly be on watch. That's the mood. Does it make sense?
Yes, Prabhu, thank you. Yes, definitely, thank you.
Any other question or comment from anybody?
I have one more question, if you don't mind, if that's okay, Prabhu.
No, please go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
It's increasing. It's becoming increasingly observable, just even in society here, especially here in the UK, for example, that there is much frustration over, not just frustration, but people are being forced into situations where they can't get work, they can't take up a property, for example. They don't have shelter, and those that have shelter can't pay rent, things like that. Just really typical, quite. But these situations are becoming more and more excessive, as it were, where people are like forced to act, to do things, to commit activity, to start to acquire higher incomes forcibly, because they don't have choice in these matters, which put them in other situations where they have to find relief in so many sinful activities. So the situation is becoming even more and more exasperated, and it's becoming more and more accelerated for so many different people I've observed. So really, how can people come out of this situation in such a way that their life comes to at least a standard of Krishna consciousness of some sort? What can be practically be possible to do something for so many, I mean, for people that are in difficulty, that are looking for some kind of peace and satisfaction, or something, at least something of substance?
Now, are you referring to the general population, or are you referring to devotees?
Well, this is referring to the general population, because they don't even find satisfaction even in the material things anymore.
True. See, this is definitely what is being spoken of in this chapter, where there's a pursuit of goals that are temporary. There's a pursuit of almost animalistic behavior because of the fact that their consciousness has become more of a survival consciousness. You see, when people are trying to survive, then they don't have the ability for compassion. They don't have the ability for the higher sublime qualities, which is what we noticed in the crisis in India, is that it's everybody for themselves in one sense. And as a consequence, it's hard to kind of go to Delhi or to Punjab or any of those places where there's intensity and to preach there, because they would say, I need to survive first, and then you can come and preach, you see. So the point which we're trying to make here is, for the general population, we need to, as a temple, as a congregation, we need to go out on Harinam. That's 100% required. We need to have faith that there's only one religion. We need to have faith that that religion is what is being propounded by Lord Chaitanya. We need to have faith that it has already been demonstrated by Srila Prabhupada in nook and corners of the world, when the world was going through a lot of complexity in the mid-60s. You know, when he demonstrated that the hippies in New York City could receive relief and they could become great Vaishnavas. He demonstrated this is because of the fact that there's only one religion. It's because the jiva is connected to Krishna. Now, because of the conditioning of the jiva and being in touch with distortions of the sat potency, there are so many different manifestations of faith and so on and so forth. But in reality, there's only one. This particular faith has to come from the heart of the practitioners of Krishna consciousness as they take out Harinam. They need to know that I'm calling upon your names, Krishna. I'm calling upon your name, and this is connected to the jiva who is walking by me on the footpath, you know, on the way to work, perhaps waiting for the bus and waiting for the subway, etc. So this faith has to be there. So Harinam is a must. This is an old solution, old school, but it is absolutely required because we will be able to bring the vibration onto the streets. The second part is Srila Prabhupada had a mandate that no one should go hungry within a certain number of square miles of a temple. So every temple should put efforts, every Namahatta should put efforts to be able to feed people prasadam wherever they are. And if you work very hard in making the prasadam palatable, if you work very hard in putting energies in becoming spiritually situated before coming in touch with cooking for Krishna, then that prasadam has the potency of clearing many, many lifetimes of distortion and purifying the tongue. So we need to go back to our very foundational faith. And that is very much required. The more we do, the greater would be the help that we would receive from Lord Gauranga, and greater would be our ability to assist the general population. Yeah, we would be able to do it. We would be able to kind of influence the general population. It may seem impractical. It may seem that people may not believe us, but in reality, it's because we don't have faith. If we know for sure that this is the only religion, because the jiva has only one relationship. He has a relationship with the Lord. The Lord manifests in so many different ways, but then jiva has a relationship with the Lord, and our business is to awaken that relationship, because we have deep faith that all these souls are connected to Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya has practically said that every town and village, my name would reverberate. It would be spoken in every town and village. So we need to kind of go back to what I would call as the basics. And those simple as they are, if they're done properly, any kind of culture, because that is the truth. We are carrying the banner of Lord Chaitanya, and he would be with us. Lord Nityananda would be with us. This is our business. This is what we need to do. This is a family business, basically, in one sense.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Sure. All right. I believe if there aren't any more questions, we will end the session. I'll probably just give a 30-second wait, and then we would end today's session. Okay, so let me just see. I see your chat question. All right, I think that I don't see any questions, so we'll end today's session. Thank you very much for joining me and motivating me to prepare and come and share a few things with you. And we'll meet again the following week, and we'll continue our discussion. These are very important foundations so that we are able to move forward with our bhakti. So I'm also learning a lot as I come in touch with Shastra to be able to share things with you. So I'm very grateful to all of you for joining me. Hare Krishna.